The US and Israel's irresponsible step, reckless step, as we warned previously, has already led to a sharp escalation of the situation across the region. In the English language, there's an ideal term to describe the situation: victim blaming.
Russia talks tough at the United States and Israel's massive attack on Iran. But did Russia abandon Tehran when the US and Israel launched an attack? Is Iran's supreme leader Khamenei's death proof of the limits of Russian friendship? Why did Putin not come to Iran's aid militarily as American and Israeli missiles rained on Tehran? Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has been killed after the United States and Israel launched a deadly attack on Iranian targets, plunging the region into a new and dangerous crisis. A Politico report claims that Tehran's top diplomats immediately dialed their counterparts in Moscow when Israel and the US launched a coordinated attack. However, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov offered his condolences and expressed sympathy, promising his political backing and strong verbal support, but stopped short of committing to any concrete military assistance. This development comes after several other allies have also felt abandoned or effectively deserted by Russia in the recent past, fueling concerns that Moscow's partnerships are far weaker than its rhetoric suggests. The Kremlin has projected its power as the champion of a new multipolar world ever since the war in Ukraine began, showcasing itself as the main defender against the West. However, when critical moments have arrived for its closest allies, Moscow's actual response on the ground has remained very limited and tightly controlled, exposing a clear gap between rhetoric and action. Russian backing ultimately did not save Syria's Bashar al-Assad, whose regime collapsed under rebel offensive, and he was eventually forced out of power despite years of support from Moscow. In Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, another high-profile Russian ally, also found that the help he received from the Kremlin was far less than he needed, as Moscow offered selective assistance rather than full-scale rescue. Now, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei has been killed in a massive attack launched by Israel and the United States, raising fresh questions over how far Russia is really willing to go for its partners in a crisis. Some analysts argue that Moscow's limited reaction should not surprise anyone, given how carefully Russia has calibrated its moves in recent years. Russian officials loudly condemned the US and Israeli actions during the 12-day war, branding them aggression and violations of international law, but they stopped short of any concrete military step. Experts also point out that, in formal legal terms, Russia is under no obligation to intervene or take direct action on Iran's behalf. The 2025 Russia-Iran Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, while broad in scope, does not contain any mutual defense clause that would compel Moscow to join the fight if Tehran is attacked. For the Kremlin, the Iran war may even serve as a useful distraction, helping to deflect some global attention away from its own grinding campaign in Ukraine. This narrative also allows Russia to keep defending its war in Ukraine, which it has consistently framed as a defensive move against Western aggression. At the same time, Moscow gets an opportunity to corner Washington diplomatically, accusing the US of failing to uphold international norms and of destabilizing the global order it claims to protect.
In recent hours, we have witnessed a further extremely dangerous ratcheting up of escalation in the Middle East. Early in the morning of the 28th of February, the United States and Israel began launching massive military strikes on the territory of Iran. It was declared that one of the aims of the attacks one of the targets were the senior political leadership of the country and also civilian nuclear facilities. In real time, we are getting reports from the Iranian authorities about casualties, including among the civilian population. More than 200 people have died in 24 provinces of the country. We were particularly aggrieved to learn of the strike on a girls' school in Minab, where it is reported that 85 children were killed. We sincerely express our sincere condolences to the family and loved ones of the victims, and we wish a swift recovery to the injured. Our country will do everything necessary to ensure the security and safety of Russian citizens that are on the territory of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Mr. President, Washington and West Jerusalem's actions are nothing other than yet another unprovoked act of armed aggression against a sovereign and independent UN member state in violation of the Charter of the organization and of the fundamental principles of international law. They are openly aimed at further interfering in the internal affairs of Iran and at destroying a state that has found disfavor with the West. The US and Israel's irresponsible step, reckless step, as we warned previously, has already led to a sharp escalation of the situation across the region. Bahrain, Jordan, Qatar, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and Syria and Saudi Arabia have all been affected. And those countries that have repeatedly said to their American partners that they don't need this escalation in the Middle East. There are obvious parallels with the events of 2003 when the US representatives waved a test tube around in this room to justify their invasion of Iraq by saying that there were weapons of mass destruction present there that no one actually found. In 2023, US Vice President J.D. Vance said that the Iraq campaign was unforced. As a result, innocent Iraqis and Americans died, and that Washington had to learn that lesson. However, as it turns out, that lesson has not yet been learned. In the statements of the European colleagues, and we'll hear that again today, instead of condemning aggression and the deaths of Iranian civilians, we once again will hear the statement of the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, saying the Iranian regime must understand that it has no other option but to engage in good faith negotiations to end its nuclear and ballistic programs, as well as its regional destabilization activities, end quote. Similar assessments were voiced by the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer. These absurd statements were then backed up by a joint statement of the leaders of the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, condemning only Iran's strikes on the countries in the region. Colleagues, just think for a moment. This sort of reaction is coming at a time when Iran has been subject to armed attack, to military attack at the peak of an active negotiating process. The hypocrisy of our European colleagues knows no borders. These aren't even double standards. It's a parallel reality, the other side of the looking glass. In the English language, there's an ideal term to describe the situation: victim blaming. One gets the impression that London, Paris, and Berlin are living within illusions that they have created for themselves and are broadcasting to the world. However, attempts to mislead the international community are doomed to fail. Any common sense person will fully well understand who is responsible, who bears responsibility for this latest uncontrolled escalation. Mr. President, we demand that the United States and Israel immediately cease their aggressive actions.
$25 करोड़ गरीब गरीबी को परास्त करके बाहर निकले।
For the good of our nation, let's work together and let's truly make America great again.
The fastest news breaks.
Requested PM saying that we will have to speak to Putin and to Zelensky.
The biggest news makers.
The relationship with India is probably the most important bilateral relationship the U.S. will have for the rest of this century.
The capital delivered quite an election result today.
Expert analysis.
The million-dollar question today is how to stop this dance of death.
Ground reports.
I'm standing at the crossroad of the Kumbh Mela. Behind me are more than 100 entry ghats.
Long-form interviews.
Exclusionary politics is reflected in Manipur case as well. You don't border because this is a small state.
Deep dive into burning issues.
It's often said DRC could be the richest country in the whole world. It's because of what sits underneath.
Why exactly did the US topple the Sheikh Hasina government?
HT videos. We don't just break news, we break it down.